Hey there, Twisters. So the Stanley Cup Final is about to start, so I thought it'd be interesting to reflect on the worst injuries that derailed Stanley Cup playoff runs. So I actually collected a bunch of your input, so I'll be sure to feature some of you guys here in this video. It's a top 15. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below. Let me know if I missed any of these. Let me know what you think is the most costly injury suffered during the playoffs that derailed a run. So again, just to kind of lay down the ground rules here. So the injury must have happened during the Stanley Cup playoffs. So no nagging injuries going into the postseason. I'm mostly picking distinct injuries as well. Again, nothing like somebody was playing with some soreness in their shoulder or something like that. That's not really part of this list that much. And the teams that won the Stanley Cup are completely out of the picture here. So these are teams that didn't win the cup in that specific year, but could have. And I actually covered two of these injuries to greater extent in our latest sudden death sports video on Scott Stevens. So be sure to see the end of this video. You'll get a little teaser for what that video is all about. All right, let's begin our countdown at number 15. I have TOMAS HERTL with my San Jose Sharks back in the 2016 Stanley Cup Final. So he has a lower body injury in Game 2. He misses the rest of the series. He was the Sharks' best forward up until that point in that series, and really the offense just goes to sleep for much of the rest of the series as TOMAS HERTL misses those 4 games. He had 5 goals and 6 assists through the first 20 games of the playoffs, so he wasn't the most electric, but he was coming on stronger down the stretch. So really, having seen Game 4 myself and having watched all the agonizing minutes of the team fail to generate quality chances, it really was difficult for the Sharks to really get anything done out there without TOMAS HERTL. All right, number 14, this is coming from Patrick Tyler, and very similarly, it's against the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it comes the next year, and that's Ryan Johansen. So kind of like well, I don't know if HERTL was playing wing or center, but with Johansen, right, you need a good center if you're going to take on Sidney Crosby or Evgeny Malkin down the middle. And Johansen, unfortunately, suffered acute compartment syndrome, I don't even know what that is, in his left thigh during the conference final against the Anaheim Ducks. So he doesn't play in the final at all. He was very productive for them in the regular season and the postseason. He had 3 goals and 10 assists through the first 14 games of the playoffs. And as a result of that, the Predators' offense was able to find some success against the Penguins, but then they get shut out in the final 2 games. So really, again, it's that matchup needing that number 1 center out there. And so the Predators, just like the Sharks, came up just a little bit short. In 13th, I have TREVOR LINDEN with the Vancouver Canucks back in 1994. The Canucks went on a crazy run that year. They went all the way to Game 7 against the New York Rangers. They lost 3-2. Now, LINDEN plays the last 4 games of this series with cracked ribs and torn rib cartilage. That sounds excruciatingly painful. Even so, he was very productive for the Canucks. He had 4 points over the last 4 games. And guess what? He actually scored the lone 2 goals for them in Game 7. So he did have a very strong impact on the team. But what if he was 100%? In 12th, I have MARIAN HOSSA in 2012. He was concussed from a vicious shot in Game 3 from Raffi Torres. Now, that he was the subject of our first video on Sudden Death Sports, so if you want to learn more about that, then watch that video as well. So HOSSA, of course, was a key piece of the Hawks offense, dating all the way back to the time that he arrived in Chicago. And that offense, without him in the lineup, they totally fold against the Phoenix Coyotes. So they score only 5 goals over their last 3 games. Now, one reason why I don't have this quite as high is because this happens in the first round. So they would have had to beat a very good Predators team in the next round, and then they would have had to beat the 2012 LA Kings, who go on this very dominant run and shut everybody in their path down. But even so, the Hawks, this is the heart of their dynasty years. So we could only imagine what could have happened if 81 was on the ice for them. In 11th, we have from Pro Charged LT, KRIS DRAPER in the 1996 conference final against the Colorado Avalanche. This happens in Game 6, and so the Wings are already facing elimination, but even so, the fact of the matter is that DRAPER takes this vicious hit. Now, he was part of that grind line, right? This line of players that could kind of patrol the ice, play very gritty hockey, and also lay some key hits out there. The Avalanche are able to take their liberties if they want, and they score 3 goals the next period, and they just cruise to a victory after that. So I don't know if DRAPER was going to necessarily provide the goals for this team, but again, it was the fact that the Avalanche could take liberties at that point. In 10th, speaking of the Red Wings, Stevie Y back in 2004 in the second round, Game 5 against the Calgary Flames. So, of course, YZERMAN is still the captain of this team. They're just 2 years removed from their last Stanley Cup. So here they're playing against the Calgary Flames. The Flames do go on one hell of a run, and a lot of people out there would argue they should have been the rightful champion in 04 against the Tampa Bay Lightning, who win in Game 7. But Red Wings and Lightning, that series, maybe the Red Wings would have actually won. But here, without YZERMAN, the Red Wings offense gets shut down 1-0 in Game 5, and then 1-0 in Game 6 against Calgary. Now, this actual injury, by the way, he took a deflected slap shot to his eye. It broke his orbital bone, and it scratched his cornea, so there was no way in hell that he would return to the ice. In 9th, I have Steven Stamkos in the 2011 conference final, Game 7 against the Boston Bruins. You have a very young Steven Stamkos. You still have Martin St. Louis playing terrific hockey, and Vincent Lecavalier as well. Those three guys are pretty much the Lightning's offense. So in Game 7, Stamkos takes a slap shot from Johnny Boychuk. He has to, of course, go to the locker room. He has a full shield coming back, but, playing in that is not exactly the most comforting for players at that point in their career, and this offense gets completely shut down 1-0. So even though they had some good weapons on that team, it would have been awesome if maybe they drew a penalty and Stammer could have gone on the ice for a power play. We know what he's done on the man advantage in his career. So it was 1-0. And of course, the Bruins, they prevail in the Stanley Cup final, the next round essentially, against the Vancouver Canucks, winning in 7 games. So that could have been the Tampa Bay Lightning. In 8th, we're going to go all the way back to 1952 with Maurice Richard and the Montreal Canadiens. So it's Game 7 of the semifinal against the Bruins. And Maurice Richard takes a hit, and while he's falling down, his head hits against the knee of a Boston Bruins player. So he's concussed. He's cut really badly above his eye as well. So he gets stitched up. He goes back to the bench, and then eventually the coach puts him back into the game in the final 5 minutes, and he scores what wins the series for the Habs. It's referred to as the unconscious goal. And so because of that, they move on to the final against a very dominant Red Wings club. So really, I still think that Detroit probably wins this series, even if Maurice Richard is 100%, but he was so integral to their offense, and his role was kind of reduced in terms of what he could do against Detroit. He had 2 goals in 4 games. The Red Wings have a complete sweep, but yeah, what could have happened with a 100% Rocket Richard out there? In 7th, as suggested by Dean Jones, one of our channel members, and also Christian, Brayden Point in 2022 first round. That was a great call out, guys. So Brayden Point gets injured in Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round. He misses, it's a lower body injury. He misses the next 2 rounds. So the Lightning get to the Stanley Cup final without him, kind of like they did with Steven Stamkos, or without Stamkos in 2020. So Brayden Point comes back onto the ice for the first 2 games, but I mean, we saw him, right? He did not look like prime Brayden Point. We know what he can do in the playoffs. He's a point-per-game player, 40 goals and 42 assists in 82 games. So an absolute lightning rod, yes, pun intended. But that Lightning offense just completely went to sleep without him out there in games 4, 5, and 6. The Avalanche completely shut them down. And I think that part of the reason was how they were able to hold the Lightning's zone very well too. But even so, that he is a catalyst in the playoffs. And so who knows, with Brayden Point, this very well could have gone to 7 games, and who knows what would have happened as a result of that. In 6th, Icewire. Great comment here. This one got the most likes. Carey Price in 2014 in the conference final against the New York Rangers. So he gets recklessly knocked over by Chris Kreider, and the two of them certainly had a few incidents over the years, and he has to miss the entire rest of the playoffs, or at least the rest of that series. Going into that game, he had a .926 save percentage. Now, I didn't have this quite as high because Dustin Tokarski comes in relief, and he plays excellent as well. It's really more about the Habs not finding the offense to beat Henrik Lundqvist and the Rangers. But even so, Price was one of those goaltenders who could steal a game for you in the postseason, just like Lundqvist could. And then they would have had to play the LA Kings if they went to the Stanley Cup final. And I know that they made it look very easy against the Rangers. They won in 5 games. But even so, could Carey Price stand on his head to win a Stanley Cup in that year? In 5th, all right, now we're getting into the Scott Stevens hits. Okay. In 2000, in the Eastern Conference Final, it's Game 7, and as a lot of you know out there, Stevens nails Eric Lindros. Lindros is concussed. Actually, Lindros had only played in his first playoff game, the game before. That was his first playoff game of that year because he missed a lot of time because of concussions. And this hit would, of course, just make his conditions worse going forward in his career. So as a result of this is early in Game 7, right? It's, I think, 1-0 Devils at that point. LINDROS was, of course, the straw that stirred the drink for that Flyers offense. They had some other good weapons out there, but without him, they couldn't get enough going against Martin Brodeur and the Devils. And if the Flyers were able to get over that hump, they would have had to face the Dallas Stars. I think they would have had a pretty good chance. And in fourth, I have the other hit from Stevens. Of course, this one came on Paul Kariya in the 0-3 final in Game 6. Kariya was the Ducks offense in the Mighty Ducks offense in the regular season. He had 22 more points than the next guy, and he was one of their key contributors, of course, and just another one of those offensive catalysts, kind of like a Brayden Point or an Eric Lindros, as we were talking about earlier. It's, the Ducks are winning this game. They would have won regardless of the hit. So they force Game 7, but Kariya, even though he's able to play in the game, he doesn't even remember playing in this game. And he wasn't, of course, anywhere near 100% given this horrible concussion that he suffered. And this would, of course, have a toll on his career. Now, the Devils won that game 3-0. So really, offensively, Anaheim had nothing going for them. With Kariya, though, at 100%, who knows what could have happened. In third, this is not necessarily a specific injury from a specific game that I recall, but kind of like with Trevor Linden, there's no way that I can leave this off. This is Patrice Bergeron in the 2013 final. He was playing with a busted rib, I don't know if that means cracked or broken, a separated shoulder. Again, players have played through that, but in combination, and he also had a punctured lung. I have had a punctured lung, and it hurts to walk. I remember bending over, and I could only go about 100 steps, just minutes after it happened. So I can't imagine what do you have to put in your body? What drugs do you have to take? Or what does the staff need to do to you to get you skating and hitting against people and that sort of thing? So I have no idea how Bergeron did this. He had already had one hell of a postseason, scoring, of course, that game tying and that overtime winner in Game 7 against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But to be able to produce at this level, he had a few goals in the Cup final there, but even if he was able to contribute just a little bit more, or defensively what he was able to do, right? Could he have held back that Chicago Blackhawks offense just a little bit? All right, and then we have our last two here. So in second, this is coming from Master Chonk. I love that name. It's Dwayne Roloson in the 06 Cup final in Game 1. So he sprains his MCL. Now, Roloson was incredible. I got to see him in person in Game 2 against the Sharks. And he was a huge piece as to why they were able to win that series and win the next one as well. Ended up with a 2.33 goals against average, a 927 save percentage. So lights out. Of course, he was trying to match what Cam Ward would do at the other end, who won the Conn Smythe eventually. But think about it this way. He gets injured in Game 1. The team loses 5-4. They lose the next game 5-0. So they're already in the hole because they don't have Rolo at 100%. And the backups that come in, or at least Markkanen, does a pretty good job to keep the team in the series. But then Game 7, the team loses 3-1. We can only imagine what would have happened if Roloson was there. Could he have given up 1 or 2 fewer goals? The way that he was playing, I absolutely think so, even though he was already very late in his career. So I think with him, they almost certainly win the Stanley Cup that year. And before we get to number 1, I'll just call out a few honorable mentions here. Some of these were suggested by you. So I thought about Jared McCann in this year's playoffs for the Kraken. Eustace, longtime channel viewer, said Leon Draisaitl last year. They did get swept by the Avs. They couldn't keep the puck out of the net, so that's why I didn't have that here. Zdeno Chara, he broke his jaw in 2019, even though he was kind of in a reduced role. Kevin Stevens for the Penguins in 1993. Chase had suggested Joe Pavelski in 2019, or any of the San Jose Sharks. Just basically, they fell apart. They were beaten to death by the St. Louis Blues, who of course won the Cup. I don't think they would have won against the Bruins though. Nicholas Lidstrom in 2009, he was able to play for the entire finals though. Riley suggested Jonathan Marchessault in 2018 after taking a dirty hit from Tom Wilson, a late hit. That does warrant a nod here because he was a lot less effective after that for the remainder of that series as the team lost the next 4 games. Matthew, who's also a Knights fan, had Mark Stone in 2021. The team couldn't find the back of the net against Carey Price in the next round after Stone had injured himself against the Colorado Avalanche in Game 5. And the real flying monkey, Pierre Turgeon in 1993. I thought about that one as well. Turgeon, though, he was able to be very effective in that conference final against the Habs. He had 2 goals and 3 assists over those 4 games, so I still don't think they would have won that series necessarily. And in first, and of course, let me know your thoughts about this in the comments down below, and that's why I'm wearing this jersey. 1998, Joe Nieuwendyk. He gets knocked out of the playoffs in Game 1. He tears his ACL on a hit from Brian Marchment. Of course, he was known for many notorious incidents. He was one of the top forwards for them after Mike Modano. This is a Modano jersey. Nieuwendyk was the top scorer after Modano, and we got to see what he did throughout his playoff career, both with the Dallas Stars and also with the Calgary Flames, winning in 1989. So the Stars, they lose in the conference final eventually to the Detroit Red Wings. This is 1998, so the Red Wings do win the Stanley Cup final. The Stars only muster 11 goals over those 7 games. So with your second highest scorer in the lineup, who knows what could have happened, of course. And after that, the Red Wings sweep the Capitals and make it look very easy. So there's a really good chance that with Nieuwendyk, the team climbs the hill against the Red Wings, the back-to-back champions. Then they defeat, in the next round, the Washington Capitals. And who knows, maybe they're back-to-back champions after that, because this team, with Nieuwendyk the next year, wins against the Buffalo Sabres, albeit in somewhat controversial fashion. All right, what do you think of my list? Let me know, of course, and stick around as we have more interesting topics like this to cover. Feel free to give me suggestions about what you want to watch next in the comments down below. And without further ado, before I sign off here, here's a trailer from our most recent Sudden Death Sports video on Scott Stevens, who wrecked 5 Stanley Cup playoff runs.
The Stanley Cup playoffs are a 2-month grind, unlike anything else in professional sports. Players have trained for decades and put everything on the line for a chance to just once in their life hoist the world's most coveted trophy, a century-old relic etched with the names of the NHL legends who have raised it themselves. But from the mid-90s into the early aughts, teams were met with a challenge that even John Wick would call an impossible task. A final boss who showed no mercy for even the game's most respected stars, Scott Stevens. And no, this video isn't just a hits montage or the same old debate over whether or not he played dirty. His mark on the NHL, especially during the playoffs, transcends the evolution of the rules and the role of the shutdown defenseman. You see, it wasn't just Hall of Famers like Paul Kariya, Ron Francis, and Eric Lindros who felt the overwhelming force of Stevens' hits in the most crucial moments of their careers. It was entire 20-man teams. These are the 5 Stanley Cup runs that were wrecked by Scott Stevens.